It's 1955. A man in his mid-70s sits in a corner office in Hartford, Connecticut, at the Hartford Accident and Indemnity Company. He is a vice president who handles surety bonds, the deeply unglamorous business of guaranteeing that contractors finish what they start. On his desk lies a letter from Harvard offering him the Charles Eliot Norton Professorship, the most prestigious poetry post in America. He has just won the Pulitzer Prize. By wide agreement, he is the finest poet the country has produced in his generation. He turns Harvard down, not because he is shy or ill, but because accepting it would mean leaving the insurance company, and the insurance company is the reason the poems exist at all. Wallace Stevens was not a poet who had to work. He was a poet who worked on purpose, and the day job brought him three things art almost never gets. The first was money that did not come from the work, which meant no editor, audience, or market got a vote on what he wrote. The second was a structure that generated the work instead of competing with it. That structure included the walk to the office, the hours of routine, and the specific texture of ordinary life that his poems are made of. The third thing was the freedom to refuse, including refusing the thing every writer is supposed to want. You have probably been told the opposite your whole life. Quit the job, go all in, and burn the boats. Stevens is the counter-example that will not go away. Wallace Stevens went to Harvard, then to law school, and then into insurance. He joined the Hartford in 1916 and stayed for the rest of his life, nearly 40 years, rising to vice president. Colleagues who worked beside him for decades reportedly had no idea he wrote poetry at all. Some of them learned it from the newspaper. He did not drive. Every morning he walked roughly 2 miles from his house on Westerly Terrace to the office, and every evening he walked back. This is where the poems happened. He composed on foot, in his head, then jotted lines on scraps of paper, and had his secretary type them up. One of the most linguistically extravagant bodies of poetry in English was assembled on a commute by a man in a suit. His days were spent in meetings about contractors defaulting on construction projects. For Stevens, the job was not a distraction from the subject of his poetry. His poetry is obsessed with the tension between plain reality and the imagination that transforms it, and the office was that subject. 8 hours of bonds, claims, contracts, and actuarial reality were followed by the walk home, where the mind did the other thing. The ordinary world supplied the pressure against which imagination could work. Stevens published his first major book, Harmonium, in 1923, when he was in his 40s. It sold almost nothing, reportedly around 100 copies. Any poet dependent on the market would have taken that as a verdict. Stevens took it as information, then went back to work Monday morning on both jobs. Historically, serious art needed a patron, a duke, a church, or a wealthy widow. Someone paid so the artist did not have to please the crowd. The modern version of the patron is a market, sales, grants, tenure, or an audience. A market has opinions, and it rewards what is legible, likable, and repeatable. Stevens made himself his own patron. An executive salary at a major insurance company meant that his poems never had to earn. When work does not have to earn, it stops being negotiable. Stevens could write dense, strange, unfashionably abstract poems about the imagination without making them commercially rational. Because the work carried no financial weight, it also carried no panic. He wrote slowly for nearly 50 years, and his greatest poems came late, in his 60s and 70s. The day job did not shorten his career. It was the reason he had one long enough to get that far. There was a cost, and it is worth being honest about it. Stevens was not a warm or easy man. The double life took something, and his friendships were thin. The famous incident with Ernest Hemingway in Key West was genuinely ugly. This is not a clean story about having it all, but a story about a specific trade made deliberately by a man who knew what he was buying. Late in his life, Harvard offered Stevens the Charles Eliot Norton Professorship. It was, for a poet, the summit, validation, prestige, and a room full of people who would finally take the poems as seriously as he did. The offer came with an effective condition. He would have to leave the Hartford. He declined. Read that as a status decision, and it is baffling. Read it as an economic one, and it is obvious. At the Hartford, nobody had an opinion about his poems, because nobody there read poems. At Harvard, everybody would. A university is not a neutral patron. Trading surety bonds for a poetry chair meant trading indifference for scrutiny, and indifference was the asset. By then, Stevens simply liked the arrangement. Vice president 2 miles each way, and 50 years of practice at being two people. He was not going to disassemble the machine that made the poems in order to accept a prize for the poems. He died the same year, still employed. The Harvard refusal was not a rejection of ambition, but a decision about what ambition was for. The first move is to separate the money from the meaning. The moment your art, side project, or idea has to pay a bill, it acquires an audience with veto power. If there is something you want to make that is genuinely yours, the fastest way to protect it may not be to go all in. Make sure it never has to earn, because the job is not the enemy of the work. Dependency is. The second move is to use the structure instead of fighting it. Stevens did not carve out a heroic 4-hour writing block at 5 in the morning. He used the 2 miles that already existed. Find the interval your life already contains, the commute, the walk, or the hour after everyone is asleep, and put the real work in it. Constraint is not the opposite of output. For most people, it is the delivery mechanism. The third move is to build toward the ability to refuse. Everything Stevens constructed brought him to the moment when he could turn down Harvard without it costing him anything. Ask a hard question about your own situation. What is the offer you could not currently say no to? Whatever that is the thing that owns you. Every serious creative person eventually meets the quiet pressure not to sell out dramatically, but to drift. It is the pressure to notice what worked, do more of it, and lean toward the room's approval. Stevens built a life in which that pressure could not reach him. The insurance company was not a compromise with his art. It was the wall around it. The strangest part is that he seems to have been genuinely happy in both halves. He was good at insurance, liked being good at it, and considered being unremarkable in one room the price of being unrepeatable in another. The day job was not the thing keeping him from his life. It was the thing paying for it. The next time someone tells you the brave move is to quit, burn the boats, and bet everything on the thing you love, remember the man who walked 2 miles to an insurance office for 40 years. He wrote some of the greatest poems in the language on the way there. He was not hedging. He was buying the right to make work that never had to please anybody, for as long as he wanted to make it. So the question is not whether you should quit your job. The question is, what is the offer you could not say no to right now? Whatever it is, that is your patron. Stevens spent 40 years making sure his patron was a company that had no interest whatsoever in his poems. If this reframed how you think about success, subscribe. There is a lot more of this kind of history coming.